This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on rise in export of agricultural and processed food products. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Ruchika Chitravanshi, journalist.
India has recorded more than 44% increase in the export of agricultural processed food products in the April-June 2021-22 quarter compared to the same period last year. Now, this growth has come in the backdrop of pandemic and also a lot of reforms that the sector has seen in light of the outbreak that the whole world has been grappling with. Mr. Bhattacharya, what is the significance of this increase for the agriculture sector and how do you see it going from here on?
I think the increase that you are seeing in agricultural exports is significant because any increase that is by a range of 44% is not a small achievement. But you have to acknowledge that this is on a base on April-June 2020 when exports were generally not doing well. But even that year, India's agricultural exports were doing quite well, almost around $3 billion in April-June 2020. So what you are seeing in April-June 2021 is a 44% increase going up to $4.8 billion. You have to see what are the items that have really contributed to the growth of this increase in agricultural exports. They are mainly rice. You have seen a big increase of 25% in rice exports. Remember, rice exports in April-June 2020 also have done quite well. So actually, almost $2.4 billion of rice exports, largely driven by basmati rice to West Asian countries, to the European countries, is something that gives you hope that Indian agricultural exports have actually found a new winning horse, so to say. And the next category within the agricultural item is meat, dairy, and poultry products. These have also gone up, and they've actually gone up by a sharper high. And they have gone up from around $500 million in April-June 2020 to more than $1 billion. Now, this is almost about 111% increase in 1 year. So the meat exports, the dairy exports, poultry product exports have done very well. These are the two categories which have given the impetus to India's higher agricultural exports. Policies have played a role, but we can discuss those policy supports and also the areas of concern, maybe in subsequent questions and answers.
We will come to the policy interventions that have been taken, and obviously a lot more needs to be done. One of the things that the government has said that the country's agri-export will register a positive growth of about 15% in the current year, 2021-22 as well. Now, the rainfall has not been evenly distributed. Kharif sowing has been below expectations. What do you think is the outlook for the agriculture sector exports?
You see, the outlook for agricultural exports looks good to me because the rains have been plenty. Also, the meat, the dairy, and the poultry industries have been free from any adverse impact of either the weather or some localized disease spread among animals. Also, the early fears that some sort of crackdown on the meat industry will have an adverse impact on buffalo meat exports in particular, in the sense that we have seen, they say, almost doubling of meat, dairy, and poultry product exports. The second area where I think we can draw some comfort is how we have managed to overcome the strict European Union norms for exports of basmati rice there. In a sense that you will recall how the European Union is very, very, not fussy, but they are very particular about health. So the other area where India can draw some comfort is from the manner in which the government has negotiated the challenges that had arisen out of the European Union's strict enforcement of norms on residues on rice particles, as also chemical residues like many of those chemical fertilizers that are used for cultivating rice. Now, I think Agricultural Product and Export Development Authority, APEDA, in consultation and collaboration with the trade bodies, the exporting bodies, has taken a lot of steps to create awareness among the basmati growing farmers, and efforts have been made to ensure that the process of fixing tolerance limits, so to say, for these chemicals while growing rice are fixed, and farmers are following those norms. So as a result, what you can hope is India's exports of rice to EU, which is unit value realization is very high when you export basmati rice to European Union, as also our meat and dairy product, poultry exports to West Asia. Those steps have been taken to promote this market. So on the whole, I am hopeful that India's exports in the agricultural sector will maintain its robust trend. And this is good news for the Indian farmers.
So you mentioned a lot of things that EPIDA has been doing to improve market access. Do you think there needs to be more coordinated approach between exporters, relevant government bodies? How can we further improve our market access?
It's a very important question and a very difficult challenge as well. Because remember, the farmers who grow rice are not necessarily the bodies that export the rice. And similarly, the buffalo meat industry or the dairy industry and the poultry industry in this country is fairly unorganized, and the exporting agencies or the exporting units are somewhat removed in many cases from the farming units or the units that they produce the goods that go out. So there is need to ensure greater coordination between the agencies that undertake exports and the agencies that grow rice and other agricultural items, plus those who are in the business of dairy products or poultry or meat. So therefore, EPIDA has to be the conduit for this connectivity, so to say, between those who are producing and those who are exporting. Unless you create that seamless connectivity between the agencies that produce and the agencies that export, my sense is that sustained growth in agricultural exports will be a formidable challenge. So I think that's an institutional response that you need to keep in mind. And the second area of focus needs to be on what kind of infrastructure support that you need to creating easy marketing channels from the rural India to coastal ports from where these exports take place. Please remember that the poultry, the dairy, the meat industry, that is very critically dependent on cold chain. And closer to the ports, if you are closer to the airports, the money that you invest in creating that cold chain is less. So therefore, it is important to create that infrastructure chain to promote exports of meat, poultry, but also items like rice.
That's a very valid point that you've touched upon, and that brings me to my next question. So in the beginning, how we mentioned that coronavirus outbreak has spurred a lot of structural reform in the agriculture sector. We've seen amendments to the Essential Commodities Act. Cabinet had approved barrier-free trade for agricultural products, contract farming arrangements, etc. Now, while a lot of the reforms that have taken place, like in the APMC, are addressing some concerns regarding the fair price to the farmers, what you have raised is a very valid point about logistics, cold chain. What should be done now to address these issues, and how crucial are they to ensure further increase in the agricultural exports?
The first thing that is necessary at this point in time is to ensure that the three agriculture laws that were passed by Parliament and now remain suspended because of the intervention by the apex court of the country. Talks must resume with the states and also the farming representatives so that those agricultural laws can be enforced, notifications and the rules that need to be framed. Please remember that even though those agricultural laws were passed, they still remain suspended. And as a matter of fact, you refer to the Essential Commodities Act, actually some stocks limits have been reimposed in areas which had been withdrawn under the new Essential Commodities Amendment. Now, so therefore, you need to stick to the spirit of those agricultural law reforms so that the benefits of marketing linkages, the benefits of creating the cold chain, the storage, the godowns are all reaped. Unless you create those infrastructure, which you could have boosted through the enforcement of those agricultural laws, the fear is that agricultural exports will grow but will not realize the immense potential that they have.
Going forward, what do you think should be some of the focus areas for agriculture sector within so many commodities that you mentioned that have seen an increase? But India is a powerhouse of agriculture, Mr. Bhattacharya. So we still need to tap on to exploit our strengths and to make a mark in the global market.
It is good that India is doing well in agriculture. It is providing income support through export earnings, provided that export earnings, those are distributed and shared equitably among the farming communities and the farmers and the actual producers. Now, these are positive signs that you are seeing income rise in the rural belt. But I think it is very important. These benefits should expand to newer areas, because at the end of the day, agriculture is, after all, primary exports. And if the same rice and the same the meat product and in the same poultry product or a dairy item, they are value added through the food processing industry, benefits will be much more, and the export earnings. While agricultural exports is encouraging sign, but it is important to move to the next level of agricultural exports, which should be value-added exports, and those can be realized if adequate steps are taken in infrastructure, and particularly infrastructure in food processing industries, which can actually take over the products that come from the agricultural sector in terms of whether they are meat, whether they are dairy items, or whether they are poultry, whether they are rice, and convert them into some sort of a value-added, better packaged products, so that net earnings, the unit value realization is more, and that will positive step forward.
The unit value realization has to be improved. Are there any suggestions if you could give to the Agriculture Ministry at this point? Would you like to give? And why just the Agriculture Ministry overall? Because there are so many departments that are involved in all of these things that you're talking about in terms of value addition. There is animal husbandry, fisheries, food processing department. How can they come together to ensure this happens?
If we want to give agriculture a sustained boost, then it is important that this sector, which is in the concurrent list of India's constitution, the center must engage more constructively, more regularly through an institutional mechanism. What needs to be done, what steps need to be taken to promote these exports and earn from these sectors. APEDA is a very, very important body, is playing a very good role, but it is important to have a body that has adequate representation from the states, so that if something on the lines of a GST council can be created in the agricultural sector, which represent the interest and concerns of both the states, as well as the center is also part of that council, which can then take an integrated approach, integrated view of what needs to be done to promote exports. Because without the states, without the involvement of these subnational entities in this entire exercise of boosting exports in agricultural sector, I think the cause of exports can be served far more remuneratively for both the farmers as well as for the country.
Mr. Bhattacharya, one macro question that I'd like to ask you is that you said in the beginning that this is a very encouraging sign and how the agriculture has performed very well. What does it mean for India's trade overall?
If you take a look at India's trade, agriculture still counts for a very small share in India's total exports. And I think India's potential is much more than that. And as I said, while we should worry about boosting, and be focused on raising the share of agriculture in our total exports, but it is equally important to go up the value chain with adequate investment in creating infrastructure, in irrigation, in marketing linkages, in cold chain, and also facilitating its connection with the global trading hubs, so that the Indian farmer can earn more dollars per unit of exports.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharya, for joining us today.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on rise in export of agricultural and processed food products. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Ruchika Chitravanshi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on your mobile app, News on Air. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.